Hey, what's up guys? James Dymond here. Next episode, Uplifting Trance here on Sonic Academy. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the next step of the production process, and it's going to be the sub bass. Now, just as with the kick drum, I want my sub bass to be really, really strong and powerful in the mix. I want it to have clarity, to be clean, but I also want to have lots of low-end warmth. And hopefully in this episode, I'll show you exactly how we can achieve this. Now, with my sub basses, I always use, or mostly use 90% of the time, sub samples. So the reason for this, I don't use a synthesizer, is because unless you have a retrigger mode on your synthesizer, then every single time you want your sub to play the exact same note every single time. And without the retrigger mode, it means that the oscillators will change the waveform very, very slightly over time. Now we're going to be doing some very fine and specific EQing. So we want to make sure that EQ applies to the exact same note or the exact same waveform every single time. And if your oscillators are changing, well, that's going to change your overall sound of your sub over time. So that's why I'm using a sample, and let's have a look exactly, see what I'm using. So I've got it all set up to the sub bass. We've got the plugins loaded, but don't worry, we'll go through those individually. Here's a sub bass. Sounds kind of like a psytrance-y kind of bass line, but don't worry, we'll turn that into a sub. And actually, this is from the Activa Sonic Academy tutorial series that he did a while ago, and it's a really nice sub that I've used in a couple of my tracks. So first thing we're going to do, we've got it linked to the channel, and we're going to change it to mono, 100% mono, because we don't, just like the kick, we want it straight down the center. We don't want any bleed into the left and right. Then we're going to add our rolling sub with the 3/16 notes. And let's have a listen to that. Sounds a bit odd at the moment. You can kind of hear that the sub is actually bleeding over. It's maybe the length of the sample is playing about, 1.5/16 notes. So in order to remove that bleed over, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our envelope settings in our sampler, and we're going to pull all of them down, and then we're going to make it 100% sustain. Now what this is going to do, it means that the sub sample will only play for as long as the MIDI is actually playing for. So in this case, it's a 1/16 note. And next up, we're going to change the velocity. If you remember in last episode, I had the kick drum and I was talking about how we want the length of the kick drum to last about 2/16 notes, and then after that it should stop around about so it can make room for the sub bass. Well, obviously this first 16th note is going to be playing at the same time as the kick, so let's just get that out the way of the kick a little bit. But the reason that we're keeping it in is because we still want to retain that nice rolling feel of the sub bass. And as the tail of the kick drum is reducing, the sound of the sub bass, the velocity is starting off lower but then getting higher. So it creates a nice kind of rolling effect. So let's just have a listen to that now. So you can hear that each individual sample is stopping exactly when we want it to, and there's no bleed over to the next 16th note. So let's have a look and see what we're going to do in terms of effects wise. The first thing we're going to do is add on the Slate Digital Virtual channel. This is the same as the Slate Digital Virtual mix bus. It's just for the channel version instead of a mix bus. And we've got it set to the Brit N, and we've got a 3 dB increase. Now, I really like the Brit N. I think it's based on the Neve console, and it really adds a nice low warmth to the sound before I've even added any EQ. So I'll just flick between the sounds so you can hear exactly what they're all doing. So they're all very, very subtle. Some are adding a little bit more high end, some are adding a little bit more kind of mid-range, kind of like the saturation. But with the Brit N, it's very clearly, you can hear that it's adding some nice extra low end. So before we've added any EQ, we're using a console and analog emulation to really kind of boost the sound already. A very natural way. So next up, let's add some EQ. First thing I'm going to do is add on a 30 Hertz cut, because we don't want really anything under about 40 Hertz to come through, but we'll come back to that later as we're just going to focus on some specific EQing at the moment. Now, this track that we're going to be producing is in E minor. I probably should have said this before. We're working in E minor. Now, you might notice that on the MIDI, on the piano roll, it says it's in C. That's because FL Studio, a sample will always default on the MIDI pattern to C when it should be up there for E. So you do have to obviously take that into account. There is a way that you can change the root notes to be starting on an E, but I never really bother. I can kind of work it out myself. But that's just something to keep in mind, as I know that people have picked up on that before. And this sample is in the key of E. Now, I know that this sample's in the key of E because I've used it before, but obviously you can change it. And the sample's pretty good. You know, it's a really good sample that you can change the key with it and it doesn't lose any of its quality. So because it's in the key of E, we want to make sure that we are boosting the exact E frequencies. So I can just play this on... play the track, and I'll change the modes to high res mode on the Voxengo Span, and we can see the exact kind of spikes of the different harmonics. Now I know that this harmonic here is the low octave E, so we can see up here it says E2, and on the top left it says 82.3 Hertz. So I'm going to go onto Pro Q, I'm going to add 82.3 Hertz, and then I'm going to make a thin Q band, and then I'm going to pull up on the gain and boost that exact low E frequency. So you can start to hear that that low E frequency is coming through very nicely now. Now, what we want to do next is we want to remove the octave above E2. So we want to remove the E3 frequency just a little bit. Now what that's going to do is going to allow this lower octave to breathe through a little bit more. We don't really want anything the octave above. Our sub area should be around, say, 60 Hertz to about 100 Hertz, usually maximum. Anything above that, we really want to try and take out. So we're going to press play again and look at our frequency analyzer. And I know for a fact that here it is here, E3, around 168 Hertz. So then I'm going to add that in, Q band, and then I'm going to reduce the E3 frequency. So you can really hear, once I've taken that out, all of a sudden you can hear the actual frequency itself. You can hear the E3 frequency, and it was that kind of high-end woody kind of sound that didn't really sound very nice, so we've gone and taken that out. So that's starting to sound a little bit nicer. Next up, we want to remove some of the resonant frequencies. So let's just add we've got another EQ here. Let me just remove that. And the resonant frequency, just as what it was with the kick drum, it's usually around 100 to 200 Hertz. It really depends on which key you're working in. But the resonant frequency, or the resonant harmonic, is going to be more than likely, it's going to be the harmonic which is in between your low octave root note, which was E2 in this case, and your high octave root note, which was E3. So if we play the track, or play the sub, and we've got our E2, we've got our E3, and here is our resonant harmonic frequency, which is A sharp, and it says it's at 119 Hertz. So let's add 119 Hertz again, thin Q band, and let's pull that out. So you can really hear, once I was muting or deselecting this frequency dip, that you can hear it. It's quite crazy that it's only once you've taken these frequencies out that you can really start to hear them. And there are times that you can kind of hear them after a long time, training your ear. I still struggle, which is nice to have the frequency analyzer. You could do these by yourself with your own ear without using the frequency analyzer. That might be a great training technique, but it's really helpful just to get started quickly and to use the frequency analyzer to help you out with those little harmonics that you need to take out. So let me just reduce the size of this. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to be adding is the BX sub filter. I really, really like this. I've been using it for a long time. What this is a sub boost. It boosts the low frequencies, but it also has a resonance kind of peak. So, for example, if we have a low cut and then we have a resonant kind of peak like this, and if you were to alternate both of these so that they would work in tandem, the resonance would move upwards with the low cut. And it's quite hard of an effect to explain, but what that basically does, it boosts the low end and it also cuts the low end at the same time. So I'm going to change it to low resonance, as we don't want the resonant peak to be too high. And then I'm going to start pulling up on the tight punch. I'll just pull the gain out a little bit down. I'm going to be pulling up on the tight punch, and this is your low cut, the tight punch. So I'll play it, have a look at the frequency analyzer, and have a look for the way that all of the low end is cut, whereas then the low E octave sub root note is going to be boosted at the same time. So as you could see from the frequency analyzer that it was cutting all of that super low end, and really it makes such a big difference to help boost your root frequency without overdoing any more extra EQ. I really like this. Plugin. And then the final step that we're going to do is with another EQ. Is now we want to chop off all of the top end. We don't want the top end of the sub. So we're going to reduce it until we've reduced and gotten rid of all of the top end. So that's sounding pretty nice. I'm liking that at the moment. So maybe we should go back into the MIDI now and just reduce the length of the notes just that little bit more. That's sounding nice. That's just tightening up the sub bass just that little bit more. Right, so let's go ahead and start getting the volume with the kick drum down. Now, I want my kick drum to be at minus 12 dB. This might sound very low. This is just the way that I mix down my tracks because it works the way that I have my kind of plugins set up, that there are, when I'm setting up the kick and bass bus, which we'll be looking at in a few episodes' time, if the kick drum or the sounds going into a bus channel are too hot, too loud, then the compressors, they'll already compress the signal without actually, with you not even putting any kind of settings in, because the signal going into it is already too high, that the threshold is already starting to compress. And it also means that when it comes to rendering out the final pre-master for mastering, it will be around minus 6 dB perfectly already once all the other sounds in the track are playing. So we can see here we've got its kick drums set to minus 12. I'm just going to turn up the master limiter a little bit more to get the volume a little bit louder. That's just for the tutorial's sake. And now we can use the Voxengo span, and we can make sure that we can get our sub bass at the exact right level. Now what I'm looking for, I'm going to play the kick drum and then I'm going to start to slowly bring up the sub bass, and I want to make sure that the sub bass and the kick are around the same level. So that's sounding really nice. As you could see on the frequency analyzer, I'll just play that again, but with the sound down. We can physically see that's the sub bass frequency, and this is the kick frequency. And over time, I'll probably play with this and move the sub up and down once we've got the bass line in. But just as a kind of average rule, that, you know, rule of thumb, that really you want your kick and your sub to be around the same level, which can be quite hard because there's some frequencies where the sub will sound a lot quieter than the way it looks on the frequency analyzer. So you do need to use your ears. At the end of the day, it's all about your ears, and we can't always 100% rely on analyzers and numbers and things like that. We have to use our ear, which is what it's all about. So that's all I'm going to do with the sub bass for the time being. Sounded really nice. So just quickly to recap, we're using the virtual channel by Slate Digital to replicate console emulation, and we've got it set to the Brit end, which adds some nice warmth to the low end before adding any EQ. We've then used the actual frequency of our root note, which is E, and we boosted the E2 lower octave, and then we removed the E3 higher octave, which allowed more room for the lower octave to come through. We then removed the kind of resonant harmonic in between the E2 and E3 octaves, and that really then just kind of tidied up the sound a little bit, removed that nasty resonance. Then we use the BX subfilter to boost the low end, so rather than using something like Waves R-Bass or any other kind of low frequency boosters, what I really like about this one is that it cuts and it boosts at the same time. And then we cut off the top end with the final EQ. And then we mixed it with the kick drum, making sure that they are around the same levels. So there we go. Quite long. Hopefully that was a good explanation of exactly how I go about doing it. Sometimes you need to add some more EQs, really depends on the sample, the sub that you've got. It's all about crafting that sub bass to make sure it sounds as clean, as powerful, as pure, but as warm as possible also. All right, that's it for this episode. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting, and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.